So I know I promised you before we started rolling on this that I wouldn't ask you a question about the Jonathan Larson musical, but do you find it ironic that in the opening minute of Pretty Woman, the characters are discussing the fact that they can't pay their rent?
Yes, and what's funny, and a lot of people don't get it because it happens so quickly, and it's totally unintentional, obviously. Um, but when my character, when he pulls up in the car, you don't see him. He's off stage, and the two girls go running together, and she's one character says to the other something, and the other one says, "No, that's not that. That's rent." Meaning, of course, they're talking about paying the rent, but of course, there's sort of the double meaning of meaning me being that guy.
Yeah, I haven't seen the show, but I was listening to the cast album and I go, all right, that just stood out to me straight away.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, rent is a universal subject.
it is, it is. We still have to
And
all,
I don't mean the musical. I mean the concept.
of course, whether it's rent or a mortgage, we all have to pay it somehow.
Right.
Unless we're independently wealthy, and by then we should still have mortgages because of the tax write-offs, but
Good
we
point.
digress. You've stated previously that you find it better to go into musicals that are already up and running rather than start a show completely. And I'm wondering, you were in Pretty Woman twice on Broadway. What's the difference for you in not just in coming into a show that's already running for short stints, but the difference in coming into a show that's now on the road?
So the situation with Pretty Woman on Broadway was something that I had never done before, which was come in and do like a couple of weeks, and then come in a month later and do a couple of weeks. Like I'd never done that before. Um, but and that's a lot in a very short amount of time. And I got to be honest with you, I didn't enjoy it at all. I kind of hated it. Um, because you get 2 weeks to get into the show, and then it takes it takes like a month. Like it takes a while, at least for me, to really settle into something and sort of be able to sort of like get it under my skin. And but in a situation like that, it was like you don't have that. You're in and out so fast. It's just like gets from the beginning to the end of the show, and but I do like taking over roles in shows that are already running because of the employment aspect of it. You know what I mean? I'm somebody who for all of my career, for the most part, except for the very beginning when Rent started, had a family. And so there's the way you look at your career, at least the way I did, changes once the responsibility goes from you to you and other people. You know what I mean? And the choices you make and the things that are important to you. And so, building a show is wonderful, but there's a lot of ifs. You know what I mean? And you spend so much time and energy and effort and sometimes years. And not that I don't enjoy that, but I couldn't. I chose to not put my focus there because I needed to work. you know.
Right. Well, family comes first at that point,
Right.
as one would expect. And look at, even if you had been originally cast as Edward in this, you still would have been making a bet that wouldn't have paid off the way you would have hoped it would have.
Right, exactly. And so, I mean, and look, that's part of that's show business. You know what I mean? It's an unfortunate business for many reasons, but it's so. But I love that I can and have done all of these things, and they're all exciting in and of themselves. Different opportunities and ways to work on different projects and do different things. It's all part of this weird sort of musical theater life.
Right, right. Which is a life that you weren't necessarily thinking that you would be a part of. And I'm going to ask you a little bit about that a little bit further down the road. But having done this show on Broadway, you get to see this show with all the bells and whistles possible. Every possible extravagance that is appropriate for the show is on stage. When you tour, it's done, shall we say, more economically. And I'm wondering what the difference is for you as an actor when you've seen the Rolls Royce version of a show to seeing a touring production, which by its very nature cannot use all the same tools?
Well, one thing I'll say is that there are some tours that are out on the road, like the Wicked tour and the Hamilton tour. Like those tours have all the same stuff that Broadway has. You know what I mean? Like there are different levels of tours and how much money is invested in those tours. You know what I mean? There are tours that are out there that are like that. Ours, for the most part, you're seeing like it doesn't really affect none of the changes really affected me. The only big scene that happened on Broadway, which if you remember from the movie, was the sort of famous bathtub scene where he comes in and he's talking to her and she's in the bathtub. So we still have that scene, and on Broadway there was a bathtub, and there was a door, and there was a room, and I went into the room, and she was in the bathtub. You know what I mean? And it happened in the way that it happened in the movie. On the road, it would have been very expensive to have that scene and that bathtub because what we don't have on the road is automation. And again, the big monster tours do, but we don't. Meaning anything that comes on and off stage is done by hand, old school style, and ropes and pulleys and whatever other. And so the bathtub thing would have just been it was too big, too cumbersome, too much room on a truck. You know what I mean? And so they cut it. And so we still have the same scene. We just restaged it in a different way. So the same. There hasn't really been that much difference, and in terms of that, the biggest difference between in this particular show between what it was on Broadway and what it is now is they made a lot of really good cuts and a lot of really good edits and a lot of good little tweaks and fixes. So it's just a much better version of the show. It's a much more streamlined version of the show and much more enjoyable version of the show.
Does that therefore make it more enjoyable for you as an actor in it?
Yeah, very much so. Absolutely. Because there's a definite difference between the audience reaction that it got on Broadway and what it gets on the road. I think it's just I think they have more clearly identified the right tone for the show. You know what I mean? That I think they were still maybe working with on Broadway. They never quite got there for various different reasons. But I think we have found the right tone for the show out here on the road, which is a much more, I think, fun, comical tone. It was a little dark on Broadway. There was something that was just a little dark about it. And I think that we've found the right sort of way to present it.
Well, it's interesting because in the original screenplay for the feature called 3000, they didn't end up together and it had a very dark, nasty ending. So
that's true, and I only knew that because I was told that, and that it was Gary Marshall. I think it was who made a lot of the changes to the original script to make it into the funny, charming movie that it is.
Right. Now, it's interesting. Richard Gere said of Edward in the movie that, quote, "It makes those guys seem dashing," which was wrong. Thankfully, today we're all more skeptical of those guys. What has the musical done to reimagine Edward for our world today as opposed to a world that existed 40 years ago?
I mean, I don't think it's done anything. You know what I mean? It's like it's not Mamet, it's not Shakespeare, it's not, you know what I mean? Like we're doing, like we're doing the movie, and nobody was trying to really, if anybody was trying to be re-examined and presented in a maybe a just not better, but like a specific way is the Vivian character, and they really took care in strengthening her character as a woman and as an individual, as a person, and her journey and how she's the one who changes it, and it's not him who comes along really and saves her. She really does save herself, and so, but for him, I think he's still that same guy, and I think the job of the actor who plays this part is to serve obviously her journey in a way. You know what I mean? He, of course, he has his own journey, but I don't know how much of it is really about that. I think it's about how they just fall in love with each other. I approach this character as his circumstances and his upbringing and all of this stuff all point to that he's like a douchebag, Right. I mean, and like like so he's got all over him. He has that already, and so what I'm trying to do is de-douchify him so that he comes off as somebody that you hopefully like and root for and understand why she would be with him. You know what I mean? Like that's you know I think it's important for her character also to that like and I've been in a couple of shows, you know, Aida being one of them, where it's like, why does she fall in love with him? Really, what does he do to make her fall in love with him? But like, you know, and so I was very conscious, and I'm very conscious of that in this story. That obviously it can't just be about the fact that he's rich, and we know that it's not just about that. But you need to see what it is, the chemistry between the two of them, that why they would fall in love with each other. That to me is pivotal in believing the story.
Right. And I will give you credit, that is the first time I've heard de-douchify used.
It might be the first time I've ever said
You know, it's interesting about the Edward character. Gary Marshall said at the time that the musical was having its tryouts in Chicago, he said, I always felt creatively that I didn't do justice to Richard Gere's character. So in the musical, we have some great new moments for Richard's character. Do you think there are fundamental differences between Edward in the film and Edward in the musical? Because what you just said seems to indicate that there isn't really that big a difference.
Uh, no, I don't actually. No, and I stand by that. There's not that big of a difference. I mean, I think the differences are come in the dynamic between hopefully the actors playing Edward and Vivian. You know what I mean? And what they can find and what they can create. And I think that that's what Olivia and I have done. And that's what makes that's what makes it special. And I think that that's what has to happen. You know, they're and yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I know that they've tried to, of course, tell a little bit more of his story, but and rightfully so. Uh, but there's only so much you can tell in a 2.5 hour musical. You know what I mean? It's like we're trying to get some of her story, we're trying to get some of his story, we're trying to follow the story of them together and how they fall in love. You know what I mean? And like it's so like it's so I think that ultimately they did a really great job with translating really what people loved about the movie. You know what I mean? There's a lot of stuff that is just like right from the movie. A lot of the dialogue is right from right from the movie because it worked. Does it work then? And if you do it right, it works now. You know.
Right, of course. Now, in listening to the cast album and listening to Andy Carl, who I think is phenomenally talented, but as he's singing, and I'm imagining you in this part, these songs feel like they fit so completely into your voice, which would seem to indicate, probably falsely, that the singing part may be the easiest part of this. So what is the biggest challenge for you in being Edward in this show?
Well, you're not wrong in that the singing part of this is does sit right in a nice, easy, sweet spot in my voice. Um, and actually, some of the stuff that's on the cast album from Andy's version, they raised up like a step to make it a little higher for a little bit to sit better, a little bit better in my voice. Um, so so yeah, I knock on wood, like it's vocally it has been like really it's been a good go. The most challenging thing, it's there's nothing challenging really about on stage stuff. You know, when you're on tour, the challenging thing is the lifestyle, the life of being on tour, and being able to bring, bring everything you need to bring every night on stage because you're going, because when you're off stage, you're going home to a different kind of a life, and one that I actually really enjoy, but it's difficult and can be difficult, and so. And physically and all the traveling and like our bodies, like we're hitting a mark now where like, our bodies are kind of like people are starting to crumble a little bit. It's like I think we're 8 months into the tour, and it takes its toll. And I'm, believe it or not, the oldest person on this tour in the cast.
And you're not that old either.
And I'm not that old, yeah. But
Right, right. It's too bad because I would assume that somebody playing the Hector Elizondo role would naturally be the oldest person on the show, but I guess not.
well, they've reimagined that character very much from the film and then from what it was on Broadway. And the actor that we have playing him now is His name's Kyle Taylor Parker, and he's so wonderful, and again he has that character sets the tone of the show in many ways, you know, and uh, and as wonderful as the actor was on Broadway, Eric Anderson, um, he had just a bit of a darker energy to him. You know what I mean? And I think it set things off in that way. And Kyle just has this wonderful. He's like a fucking ray of sunshine. You know what I mean? And you just you love him, and the audience loves him, and so um, it's yeah. So
Well, that's great. So there's no way of beating around the bush. Pretty Woman did not succeed on Broadway. Shortly thereafter, two other attempts of turning movies into musicals, Tootsie and now Mrs. Doubtfire, also did not succeed. And I've spoken to producers who have said one reason may be is in the post-Me Too movement that the idea that a man can make a woman's life better instead of a woman's can make her life better, or that a man in drag is the person who can get the relationship that he wants, whether it's with an actress or with an ex-wife, that we've moved past this at this point. Is there still room for a Cinderella story like Pretty Woman?
well, yeah, absolutely, and our success on the road, I think, actually speaks to that. You know what I mean? Because you're right, the show did not do well on Broadway, but it's doing very well on the road, and people are responding incredibly well, and audiences love it, and it's selling well, and it's doing all the things you want it to do, right? And you know, I think the key, certainly nowadays, in telling a Cinderella story, is to acknowledge that Cinderella doesn't need Prince Charming and can do it anyway. You know what I mean? Like, I think that that's sort of like, but isn't it nice and charming and wonderful and fun when they do it together? You know what I mean? And she can still be her own hero. You know, like, and with a little help from him. You know what I mean? It's sort of like the balance has to shift. You know what I mean? And I think we have found, like, that great balance. But but with regards to those other shows, I mean, I don't think that necessarily maybe the lack of success of those two shows has anything to do with people's thoughts or ideas or sort of what are socially acceptable things. I think it just has to do with those shows, for whatever reason, didn't connect in a musical form on a large scale for a million different reasons. You know what I mean? I mean, let's take Doubtfire for example. I mean, look at all the hurdles they had to jump over, and then they, you know what I mean, the pandemic, and then they closed down, and then they reopened, and then they closed, and then they had all of the COVID. So, like, it was just they took too many blows. You know what I mean? And all of those blows affected the box office dramatically. But what also affected the box office dramatically is just that maybe the show was problematic in some ways. And I don't mean, sort of like idea wise. I mean, like, maybe it just could have been better. Like, honestly. And I didn't see it, and I'm not judging it. I'm just saying that, like, sometimes that's the thing. And I would say all of that stuff about Tootsie too. I didn't see it. I don't know, but maybe it just could have been better.
Right.
Sometimes that's the answer too, and it's not about, like, people aren't accepting of this or that or whatever. It's just, I think, you know, um, it just has to connect, and for some reason it didn't. You know.
Right. Well, and good for Rob McClure because he was just announced today as going into Little Shop of Horrors off Broadway,
I saw that. I was very excited for him.
which I think is great. So I saw you do a cabaret show here with your fellow Rent co-star at Catalina Bar and Grill, and it struck me that you were in your most natural element when you were doing your rock and roll stuff. And I know how much the rock and roll stuff means to you. Is that still something that you want to continue doing, or you would like to have a better shot at doing something on a bigger scale?
Yes, and I'm going to answer your question in 1 second, Craig, but I want you to give me 1 second because I don't want to cut this off short. But I have another interview at 1, but I want to push that. So let me just text the guy and tell him to give me a few minutes because I don't want to
Great.
cut you.
Of course. Thank you.
Sure. So Yeah, that is important to me. And you know, at this point in my career, I've been doing this a long time. Like that's always been like I've managed to sort of cultivate it because I've always done it in one form or another. That I've kind of gotten to a place where like it's a legitimate part of my career. Like I can make money doing it. You know what I mean? Like I go out and I play gigs, and it's always I've gotten better at it. You know, and so it's very important to me. You know, like you know, I look at people like you know, some of my peers, some of my musical theater peers, like you know, Norbert or Will Chase or any of these you know other guys sort of like in, you know, and sometimes I look at their careers and I think, and I'm envious that like they have you know success. They do a lot of TV and they do like you know, and I'm envious of that. I'm like, oh God, like I wish I could do that, you know. And then, but then I sort of when I think about it, I realize that like you know the time like we all have our musical theater stuff that we do, and then the time that's not devoted to that for actors like them, they they give all of their other time to trying to do TV and film stuff like that. That's that part of their career. And like what I've always done, I've always it's just kind of always pulled me there. It was like when I'm not doing musical theater or sort of things like that, I do tend to go out and do gigs and my own music, and I've so like that time that I would devote to that is now it has been devoted to doing that, you know, and I'm happiest doing that, you know. So yeah, I do. I love it.
Well, you have a voice to do all of the Who's material. So I know there's discussion of a revival of Tommy. Maybe that's a marriage of the two somehow, even though it's not your own material.
No, it's not, and unfortunately, I'm a little old to play Tommy.
No,
but
I know, but
yeah, but maybe in some way, you know, maybe you know, it's interesting. Before I got into Rent, the year it must have been the year before, or yeah, maybe a year or two before. I was living in New York City, and I was a personal trainer, and I worked at Equinox in the Upper West Side. And one of my clients was an actor named Anthony Barilli, and Anthony was in the original cast of Tommy. He played cousin Kevin. And when I was training him, we used to talk about his job and what he was doing. And he actually invited me to the show, and he got me tickets, and I went to see it. And I loved it because I was a huge fan of the Who and of Tommy. Um, and so cut to like, and then he stopped training with me, and we lost touch a little bit. And then the next time I saw him was I think it was outside the stage door when Rent had already gone to Broadway. You know, like it was like like this weird craziness, like you know, because when I was training him, I was a trainer in a rock band. I wasn't doing theater, so it was like this crazy thing of like you know.
it's amazing how the world works out.
Yeah.
Well, I want to finish by asking you about something that you told Playbill a while ago, which I thought was remarkably candid, which I don't think a lot of people say. You said it was a good number of years of, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, failures and bad reviews happening to you before you realize you're not the golden child that everybody thought you were in Rent. And I'm wondering what that realization did for you and how that's impacted your career options and the choices that you've made.
Um. Well, uh, I think you just. I think I just, and you know, begrudgingly so, you know, realize that like if to have a career in this business, and it's been and has always been an evolution. You know, look, starting from that place of Rent, it was the greatest and worst thing that ever happened to me. You know, and so. It tainted everything. Its tentacles extended into everything in my career and in my life. You know what I mean? And it still does. But now those tentacles are warm and fuzzy and they feel good. You know what I mean? But for many years they didn't always. You know what I mean? And and also you know nothing can ever live up to that success. You know what I mean? That level of success. You know. And so everything is always going to be a little bit of a letdown, even if you can step back and acknowledge it, you know, sort of, you know, you know, from a meta place and just say like, no, I understand, nothing can be that way, and this is the way but you still on the other in the emotional part of you still feel it, you know, you still like, but why can't it, you know, so it, yes, so it was a hard place to find to go from up here and then to get to like this middle place where like 27 years later I'm still having a career. You know what I mean? Like you have to sort of like find that sort of bumpy middle place, you know, because you can't live up here, and obviously you can't live down here either. You have to maintain. You have to find that, and that bumpy middle place is difficult. It's hard. It's emotionally hard. It's emotionally hard business. You know, it's terribly, you know, difficult. You know, to stay grounded and to and to not give up and to you know realize that you know failure is a huge part of and failure takes a different you know it looks different at different times for different people, and you know what I mean, what that you know some people may look at something as a failure and others may not, you know what I mean, and so anyway it's just yeah, it's a lot, but I'm so grateful for all of it, you know, and I'm so grateful that I'm here now, and I get to have this amazing job that I love, you know, and you know, it's a hard life being in show business, you know what I mean, and so it's a fun life, you know, the job. I've just talked about this recently, when I get when I get a job, quote unquote, a show like this or whatever, that's not the job, you know, like that's what I love to do, you know, like the job is trying to get the job. That's what the job of a career in show business is to me, is trying to get the work. The work is not the job. The job is to get the work, you know what I mean.
Right. Well, remember what John Lennon wrote: life is what happens with your when you're busy making other plans.
Exactly, and that's a line from our show as well, and that is a lyric in one of our songs in Pretty Woman.
Well, somebody was listening to John Lennon.
Indeed.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Adam. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to see the show at the Pantages because I'm leaving for England tomorrow for a couple weeks.
Oh, okay. Well, enjoy your trip.
I will, and enjoy the run of the show. And thanks again for your time.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Take care.
Bye, Craig.
Bye-bye.